So we are going to continue our reading and commentary on the Proverbs. We just finished chapter 5. And I was just thinking to myself, it's good to warm yourself up into when new episodes come about. I think often it's difficult to get into the state of mind that's required or necessary. But I think the practice in and of itself is something that applies to many facets of life. That is the process of coming to attention, focusing on the task at hand. And often I think that one of the things that helps us do this, not only as discipline, but also focusing on the relevant objectives, remembering the goals that you are after, that you would like to achieve. Remember why what you are doing is good. And if you can't justify to yourself that whatever you are doing is good or is on the path towards good, then further reflection is necessary to see how one can reorient and walk a different path. So chapter 6. My son, if you be surety for your friend, if you have stricken your hand with a stranger, you are snared with the words of your mouth. You are taken with the words of your mouth. Do this now, my son, and deliver yourself. When thou art come into the hand of thy friend, go humble yourself, and make sure your friend. Give not sleep to your eyes, nor slumber to your eyelids. Deliver yourself as a roe from the hand of the hunter, and as a bird from the hand of the fowler. Go to the ant, you sluggard, consider her ways and be wise, which having no guide, overseer, or ruler, provides her meat in the summer, and gathereth her food in the harvest. How long will you sleep, O sluggard? When will you arise out of your sleep? Yet a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep. So shall your poverty come as one that travelleth, and your want as an armed man. A naughty person, a wicked man, walketh with a froward mouth. He winketh with his eyes. He speaketh with his feet. He teacheth with his fingers. Frowardness is in his heart. He deviseth mischief continually. He soweth discord. Therefore shall his calamity come suddenly. Suddenly shall he be broken without remedy. These 6 things does the Lord hate. 7 are an abomination unto him: a proud look, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood, an heart that deviseth wicked imaginations, feet that be swift in running to mischief, a false witness that speaks lies, and he that soweth discord among brethren. My son, keep your father's commandment, and forsake not the law of your mother. Bind them continually upon your heart, and tie them about your neck. When you go, it shall lead you. When you sleep, it shall keep you. And when you awake, it shall talk with you. For the commandment is a lamp, and the law is light. And reproofs of instruction are the way of life, to keep you from the evil woman, from the flattery of the tongue of a strange woman. Lust not after her beauty in your heart, neither let her take you with her eyelids. For by means of a whorish woman a man is brought to a piece of bread, and the adulteress will hunt for the precious life. Can a man take fire in his bosom, and his clothes not be burned? Can one go upon hot coals, and his feet not be burned? So that he goes into his neighbor's wife. Whoever toucheth her shall not be innocent. Men do not despise a thief, if he steal to satisfy his soul when he is hungry. But if he be found, he shall restore sevenfold. He shall give the substance of his house. But whoso committeth adultery with a woman lacketh understanding. He that does it destroys his own soul. A wound and dishonor shall he get, and his reproach shall not be wiped away. For jealousy is the rage of a man. Therefore he will not spare in the day of vengeance. He will not regard any ransom, neither will he rest content, though you givest many gifts. So that concludes chapter 6. Now let us remember that we use these verses, we use these chapters as a gateway into understanding, as a path to walk towards connectedness. And so we can't fly over things without adequate reflection. Otherwise we would miss this. We would just not undergo the process. We would otherwise be passive consumers. And passive consumers really, I think, have a difficulty understanding and knowing things. They really have to ingrain what it is that they want to know. And so this is why we commit ourselves to this practice. Now, if we remember from last episode, when we were talking, making our way through chapter 5, there's a very insightful few verses in there that speaks of a stranger, of a strange woman. She has a particular way about her. She is a pattern of our experience. She invades our intelligible sphere and she tempts us away from it. She is, as the verse says, but her end is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death, her steps take hold on hell. And in verse 3, sort of in the introduction to this person, for the lips of a strange woman drop as a honeycomb, and her mouth is smoother than oil. And so the stranger, surely a double-edged sword, it is at once possibly a pathogen, possibly a structural addition, something that provides robustness to the whole. It could be a disruptor or a unifier. New perspective brings new way of seeing, new ways of seeing may lose sight of the current way of seeing. And this seeing business is what really holds us together. It's what allows us to understand one another, make sense of the world, and exchange information between individuals. Now, profound confusion, regardless of the end, is inherently destabilizing. And I think we should always pay attention. Despite the positives that the stranger can bring, the negatives are quite severe. And at the very least, we should exercise discretion when dealing with the stranger, whether in our own personal lives or that which is written into national policy. My son, if you be surety for your friend, if you have stricken your hand with a stranger, you are snared with the words of your mouth. You are taken with the words of your mouth. Now, this word surety, I'd never heard that before. And it's in relation to your friend. If you be surety for your friend. Now, a Google definition of surety is a person who takes responsibility for another's performance of an undertaking. An example, they're appearing in court or the payment of a debt. So in this way, if we are to be responsible individuals in the face of our intimate personal relationships, and if it is the case that we have been stricken by the hand of a stranger, and as a consequence we are snared, our words are caught up, they cannot escape. They are left there to wither away into the condition of death, which is meaninglessness. And for our words to be taken from us in this way is to mean that we can no longer communicate with our loved ones. We can no longer maintain our intimate relationships. We can no longer, a lot of the time, these sorts of things, I believe, come down to that of making sense of things in general. That, along with the orientation of one's attention, is vital for the understanding of the conscious mind. Now, the other thing I would say is, if you happen to hear a bunch of what would sound like gunshots, and perhaps what would sound like the setting of a war zone, I assure you that I'm not recording in the middle of a battlefield, although that would be quite interesting. It is the 3rd of July, also known as another 4th of July. And the thought just crossed my mind, actually, that I rather wish that I was watching fireworks. But that being said, coming back to the things that we choose to focus on and what we understand, also considering what we said about the woman that tempts us away from that which is known. If we are confused, what does that mean about the people around us? Will they not fall into this confusion? Will we not, if we are stricken by the hand of the stranger, if we are tempted by the woman into the darkness beyond which our family doesn't, or our friends don't even understand what it means to live in a place so desolate? certainly at this point, those close to us would be affected by it. And so in verse 3 it says, "Do this now, my son, and deliver yourself. When you art come into the hand of your friend, go humble yourself, and make sure your friend." So it's saying, in informal terms, to get squared away. Make sure you understand yourself. Deliver yourself from what? A strange thing to think of, delivering oneself. I think about an example, a real life analogy, when I think of deliver, I think of somebody that takes a package somewhere and physically delivers it. I'd imagine that if we were to do that with ourselves, we were to take it to some place, this would be our sort of delivery of ourselves. But what are we delivering ourselves to? Where are we going? We're going somewhere we ought to be, away from the place we are being sent from. Now, we could say all sorts of things about the place that we have sent ourselves to. Rather, I should say that we can make up all sorts of things that we would like to see at this new place that we arrive to. But I think much of this setting is going to be against any emotional satisfaction. Or at least I should say the beginning of deliverance, the beginning of the journey to that of being delivered. Keep our analogy consistent. At the end of our journey, we will know what the ending is going to be, because throughout the path we've taken the turns and the roads that have directed us towards that location. All the while we've been observing our surroundings. The worse things got, we chose to move in the opposite direction. The better things got, the more love we received, the more love that we can give, we moved in that direction. And so now when we are delivered, when we come into the hand of our friend, when we are embraced, we can then make sure of our friend. We could be certain that we are providing love to that person. We can be certain that we are accepting their love. Now, of course, this is just my interpretation. Give not sleep to your eyes, nor slumber to your eyelids. Again, the distinction between the eyes and the eyelids. Give not sleep to your eyes. That means keep them open so that you may see. Don't rest from what is known, nor slumber to your eyelids. Now, what is the eyelid? It is the thing, again, that covers the eye, that prevents it from seeing. Now, it's possible that we have two analogies here of a different kind, rather than one analogy of similar metaphors. I would say that if we are going to take the more complex road to this interpretation, and we are to identify these things as separate and distinct, although maybe somewhat related, it seems as though we are describing something that is closer towards the center in the first part. Give not sleep to your eyes. Eyes are behind the eyelids. The eyelids are more forward. The eyes, a more direct comparison to the symbol of sight, which can also be equivalent to perception, which then can lead to knowing and understanding. Seeing itself, I think, is often recognized as something that is as quickly illuminating as a light is in a darkened room. Time here has not much of a place. It is about the process by which the understanding and knowing occurs, and it's packed into this box of the symbol that is this seeing. Now, the eyelids being farther away, I would think something more of an earthly metaphor. I would think that the first has to do with maintain focus, mental focus, and the second having to do with where we place our attention, where we literally place our attention in terms of the thing that we direct our body towards, the way we act out our experience in the world. Because we could spend all of our days up in the sphere of the conscious mind, thinking about the things that we have seen and trying to accept or reject certain inconsistencies, or trying to identify different patterns. But if we cease to be the type of beings that place ourselves in the environment of seeing that is not obstructed by the what would we say, the solitude and the holding chamber that is the education of the mind. Now, I understand that my definition of the educated mind is not it's not polite. Certainly there are, and maybe more polite definitions, ways of understanding the educated mind that goes beyond that of just sit in a classroom and do your thing. A more integrated experience to approach to learning. I think that certainly can exist, but in the context of our culture and our society today, it doesn't seem to be that way, so I define it as such according to the age. But to reiterate, the eyelid, in some sense, again, taking it from its principled function, at least our observed understanding, is that it is something that opens and closes. It is something that obstructs. Now, there are more interpretations. There are further paths that we can go down. What happens during the obstruction? What happens during its times of opening? But the main purpose, I think, in the case of the eyelid, is this physical structure should be engaged and maintain some level of interaction with the environment, such that It provides the food, the substrate, for the eyes, and thereby the sort of conscious mind and its perceptive abilities to experience the world and to have information to make effective decisions. Deliver yourself as a roe from the hand of the hunter, and as a bird from the hand of the fowler. The hunter all the same, the one that shoots for the earth or the one that shoots for the air or for the heavens. In some sense, the priest or the king. Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider her ways and be wise. Go to the ant. If we are to assume that this is the insect, A-N-T, and then we are immediately reprimanded for being a sluggard. If we consider our behavior to the behavior of the ants are incredibly hardworking. They are nature's communists. They are, as a whole, they do what they do to propagate their own. So again, whenever we saw this a lot with in the past chapters, the ones that we have read. When something is referred to as female or male, I think it's prudent to take notice. It's prudent to take notice in many cases to identify possible patterns, but in the case of the gender distinction, I think that there has some meaning in that. When it says, "Go to the ant, you sluggard, consider her ways and be wise," we saw from a few chapters ago that the female, with all of her traits and characteristics, through her love and her compassion, her nurturing nature, she is also wound up in this symbol, or she has within her understanding and wisdom. And so there's a way about which the ants, as they work together, and the way that they propagate themselves, the way of their resilience and their strength, we should consider her ways and be wise. Which, having no guide, overseer, or ruler, provideth her meat in the summer, and gathereth her food in the harvest. And so, an interesting thing to be written in the time of Solomon, in the time of fairly early on in the young Israel's experience with the kings. David was the second king after Saul. Saul was the first king of Israel. Solomon followed David, being his son. This seemingly is in the time of Solomon, I would imagine. No guide, overseer, or ruler provides her meat in the summer and gathers her food in the harvest. So just as the ants are resilient and they know how to do and be practical, we shall do as well. And we do so for self-reliance. We talk about deliverance. In the first part of this proverb, we talked about deliverance and how this can have an impact on friends, family. We talked about being stricken by the stranger. And it would seem that as we go about keeping ourselves connected, we insulate ourselves from the stranger. We seek to understand. We make sure that we are hardworking. Again, as the ants, we keep our eyes open. We are always thinking. That we will not go without. We will have food in the summer. We'll have meat in the summer. And we will have food in the harvest. How long will you sleep, O sluggard? When will you arise out of your sleep? Yet a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep. So shall your property come as one that travelleth, and they want as an armed man. So now back into this sluggard business. The identification of the person that is not holding up. They are not maintaining the truth. They don't have a solid pillar around which they can plant themselves and provide a sustainable future for their offspring. They're not committed to learning. Perhaps they're committed to, well, of course we can see here, sleep. It is a profound symbol for that of something that draws the attention away. It is the lack of attention. It is unconsciousness, literally. And so we can interpret it as such. O sluggard, when will you arise out of your lack of consciousness, out of your unconscious state, or your dimly lit ways? Yet a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep. And because of this ease and lack of sacrifice, your poverty comes as one that travels, again like the stranger. And they want as an armed man. For once we had things, now we are the murderous barbarians wandering the streets to find things to sustain us. A naughty person, a wicked man, walketh with a froward mouth. A contrary way about this person. Perhaps untruthful. He winketh with his eyes. He speaks with his feet. He teacheth with his fingers. Frowardness is in his heart. He deviseth mischief continually. He soweth discord. Therefore shall his calamity come suddenly. Suddenly shall he be broken without remedy. So let's begin back at verse 13. He winketh with his eyes. He speaketh with his feet. He teacheth with his fingers. Now a wink is something that I haven't thought much about. You don't often see winks too often these days. I feel as though they used to be more popular in the 80s and 90s in the movies. but I don't see the behavior much anymore. But that is neither here nor there. The wink in and of itself can occur under a number of different circumstances. From what I can think of at the moment, I think of a wink being an expression of acknowledgement, possibly an assurance between two people. It could indicate a secret. It could indicate, along with this secretive expression, I would say that it's possible that it could be covering something. Of course, when we wink, we obstruct our vision. When we obstruct our vision, we obstruct our sight in terms of perception. In this momentary withdrawal from the world at the moment suggests that we are in another realm. I think we are in the realm of the mind, by which we are communicating to somebody else something about our intention. It loosely is based in the experience that we are having. Because the experience, let's say, when the wink is in the context of a secret or a hidden meaning, it is denying the behavior and the action in the world. Now, the wink obviously is an action in the world, but it is accompanied by a negation of the behavior or of the content of one's words. I think of three people, conversation between two people, and then the individual that was discussing turns to the other individual and winks to them. And this seemingly is the string by which the knot is untied, the knot that is the language that was used by our person of interest in dialogue with another person. And so there is a falsehood associated with this winking. Now, of course, there are other reasons why one may wink, but these are largely out of context, I think, to what we are discussing here. So to recap, I think when we say he winketh with his eyes, we are thinking of deception. Or we are thinking something secret. We are thinking something hidden. He speaketh with his feet. Another interesting expression, because obviously the feet do not speak, only the mouth, directed by the mind, and the flow of air through the vocal cords is the thing that truly speaks. But the feet, what does it mean for them to speak? Well, of course, our spoken word is one of the methods by which we relay information, often complex information, about either how we're feeling, about what we desire, any number of things. The feet are the thing of the ground. They come in contact with the earth. They are, in some sense, dirty. The dirty representations of ourselves. They are the thing that does the carrying of the body. So if we are to try to narrow down an interpretation here, if we focus on the carrying element of the feet, I would say that if one is to speak with the feet in this sense, there is always motion to one's speech, which means it cannot be tied down to anything specific. And from what we understand so far about the Platonic dialogues and the Socratic teaching, is that there were many people in Socrates' day that went about believing that things were constantly in motion or constantly in flux. And that led to this sort of understanding, or the idea, that there is no concreteness. There is no place by which we can set down and say that this is true. It is always moving from one place to another, almost a constant diversion. Unfixable. What I hear is a degree of self-interest. Perhaps a large degree of self-interest. And coming off the heels of the winking eye and keeping in understanding that we are talking about this sluggard. We understand that he is a froward person, he is contrary, he is difficult to deal with. I think of this motion as being used for selfish means, for deceptive purposes. He teaches with his fingers. To teach one with the fingers is, the first word that comes to mind is to direct. It is complete emanation. This type of teaching is in the context of I have to be careful with the language here, because the first thing that came to mind was master and slave. And I think that it's accurate. I was also thinking of a subordinate to some person of some office that holds some authority. But it's not the authority that is the thing that is contrary here. Because in the case of the child, in the case of the teacher has authority. And it is not as though the authority is a negative thing to be abolished. Certainly that must exist. And certainly the teacher in some degree directs children in their way of learning. But they do so not through the pointing of a finger. They do so through a long, methodical process using speech and using body language and whatever else they have at their disposal to direct kids in that way. And that part of their goal is to ignite the engine of their mind so that they can effectively reason and effectively retain information. I think the earlier analogy to that of the master and the slave is accurate here. The master is not necessarily concerned about teaching the slave, although the slave may know certain things about his duties. The master is concerned with direction, because the slave doesn't need to reason. The slave does not need to worry about elevated things. He is to be directed and controlled by simple means. He is not the same as his master. His master is higher on the hierarchy of value. So, again, we have a deceptive man. We have a lazy person, this sluggard. We have a person that is willfully, albeit lazily, staying within his darkness, refusing to orient his attention. We have somebody that has lived through the consequences, through poverty. And through their poverty, they refuse to accept. Through their consequences that they experience for their nature, their behavior, they refuse to accept that what has gone on is because of their own doing. Frowardness in his heart, he deviseth mischief continually. He soweth discord. Again, this frowardness, it seems to be the favorite word of the Proverbs so far. If I haven't said that already. The contrarian, the one that is habitually disposed to disobedience and opposition. This being something that is bound in his heart, is disobedience and opposition. How terrible. I think that there is a parallel to our modern day. I can't help but to think that the postmodern rationalist deductionalism, if I can call it that, if that's a word, that is this constant reducing of something. This perversion of the skeptical nature, where at once the skeptic was the thing, was the person, was the process by which one reserved their judgment in order to appropriately guarantee an account so that they can make a higher quality judgment. It has turned into something that is completely destructive in its character, that it is not concerned about waiting for information. Its sole purpose is to break down into pieces. It is to separate from the whole. It is the woman in our example in the last episode of our campfire, tempting us away from our intelligible sphere. It is this person that we are talking about here, the forwardness. And as I think about the modern day and I think about my own behavior, I recognize that there are elements about myself that are this way. I think I'm quick to comfort. There are so many things these days that seemingly attempt to entertain or to distract one's attention. And I think even more sinister than that, the business model that attempts to maximize engagement may do so even in the context of useful information. Where it turns awry, I think, is the volume of information. And by the sheer volume, it outpaces the rate at which the individual can retain information. And so necessarily it is fragmented in nature as it is solidified into memory. Surely we are more informed if we make judicious decisions about the information that we consume. But we are impoverished by the constant bombardment of information if we are unable to accurately and appropriately attend to what we are consuming and to understand it, to know it. And in this way, I think that I am guilty. Moreover from that, the more obvious things, I think, pervert my attention. All the silly videos out there that you can scroll through indefinitely, I'm guilty of that. Generally, I'm guilty of the perversion of intention. And often I do so willfully, even when my mind brings up more sensible pursuits that I should be reading. But the part of myself that says, no, you can always retain information in an easier way. Reading is more difficult for you than it is to passively listen to something. But of course, passively reading something is easier than actively trying to understand the information that is being presented. And the same is true of listening. That passivity is the thing that gets in the way of understanding and retention. Now, we can say that any number of things can be passive, but like in learning, they say that reading in general is passive. I don't think I necessarily agree with that. It depends on how you direct and orient your attention. I think there are benefits by more active forms of learning through undergoing testing to see if what you were doing actually made an impact on what you know. I think that is important. They consider that to be active. But at some point the information has to come in, regardless of what we call it. He deviseth mischief continually. He soweth discord. So these terms, mischief and discord, creating troubled waters from an otherwise peaceful environment. Therefore shall his calamity come suddenly. Suddenly shall he be broken without remedy. Now, why would it be sudden? I suppose there are any number of avenues that we can walk down to try and describe why calamity would come to him, but I can imagine if I spent my life trying to break things down, to separate and to disrupt, there would be a part of myself that would be inherently disrupted. There must be a well by which things spring from, some source, and if my belief is that the inherent good, albeit a misplaced good, is to break things apart for the sake of breaking apart, then surely I would come apart at some point. I would reach this point of calamity, to be broken without remedy. And perhaps that just means that I'm unable to recover from my belief. I'm so far down and so fragmented that I don't understand what it would even mean to become whole again. Such a loveless condition is frightening. These 6 things does the Lord hate. 7 are an abomination unto him: a proud look, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood. Now, pride is something that is often considered to be a negative thing, and yet we often use it in a positive context. You should be proud of your achievements. But what of this pride? What exactly is it? And why would the way of things the thing of order and understanding and wisdom be hateful, or be seen as hateful, I should say. What does it mean to be proud? Let's take the example that we just used. The common cultural, you should be proud of your achievements. Let's say somebody that has recently finished something difficult, whether they're at work or at school. They've achieved something in life. In this way, what does it mean to be proud? I think it means to reflect on one's achievements and to feel that they have done good, that they have done well. It is a judgment of the self, an appraisal of the self, an elevation of the self. A satisfaction of the self. A conscious understanding of one's dignity, a respect in oneself. I think that this is potentially negative because it is an inflation of a part of ourselves that is dangerous. The ego, we can say. This part of ourselves that is just like the man that we were talking about. The highly egotistical, the self-absorbed. That the self is inflated, or just as the language that I used implies, the self-absorbed. It is taking in something. What exactly is it taking in? And if it is full of this thing that it takes in, why is this negative? Well, if somebody is self-absorbed, their attention is oriented on themselves, and not out into the world, not about the elevated things, not about the people around them. And so what they are absorbing of course is the self. But what does it mean to absorb the self, or to be self-absorbed? Going along with what I said about the orientation of attention inward, the inflation and the expansion of praise, of satisfaction, of pleasure and of delight. All of these things are characteristics of the sluggard if they are not paired to anything real or whole or anything that connects things together. So this would lead me to say that to be proud of one's achievements is possible, albeit dangerous. And if we undergo a long process of excretion, it's possible that a reward for that would be a self-acknowledgement. But that raises larger questions about the role of the self in general. I was thinking about Cartesian dualism earlier today. This object and subject relationship. And that the Western world seems to have, myself included, I'm painfully beginning to realize how much, to what degree, has become entirely self-absorbed. We are obsessed with ourselves. And the irony is, one of my primary complaints about the age is that people have difficulty understanding what it means to be an individual. And how ironic is that in an age of self-absorption, individualism is the hardest thing to attain. To be an individual and to accept the burdens of the way that things are, I think, is conditional. And I think based on those conditions, it restricts the overinflation of the self, which would necessarily mean that there must be constraints placed on our political god, that is liberalism. Otherwise, free of its constraints, it turns inward and it becomes selfish. It forgets about true value. And instead of doing things for the sake of what is right and what is good, things are done for the sake of the self, the individual liberation, individual satisfaction, individual freedom. And as difficult as it sounds to myself, because I know that I am complicit in this, in the society of the sluggards, I know this to be true, and I know that it requires change. I know that the change must start with the individual. Again, another ironic statement. But it is the sifting through the self that I think that one can become an individual. Because as we turn, I hesitate to say, a turn inwards, or maybe I should say as we reflect, not in pride, but in honesty and in humility, we may sacrifice what is necessary to sacrifice. We give up what is unnecessary of ourselves. Now, sacrifices must be done for things that are valuable. And for many of us, I think that there are quite prideful things that will be very difficult and very painful to give up. I'd imagine it as painful, if not more painful, than amputating a finger, let's say, or amputating. It is a conscious amputation, to be perfectly frank, as the self and the prideful age continues. The absorption and the volume of the ego only increases, and that means the part of us that needs to be sacrificed becomes larger and larger and more difficult. The scary thing, really, for there would be many of those that would be too fearful of what it would take to sacrifice that thing, and rather than do so, they would rather preserve themselves as they are. Because again, the thing that requires amputation is so large that it is very frightening. The amount of pain that would come with it is understandably frightening. Verse 15 starts to make more sense. Therefore shall his calamity come suddenly. Suddenly shall he be broken without remedy. So we've covered one of the 6 things. The second is a lying tongue. We've discussed this a bit when we talked about that of the wink and what that might mean. The speaking of the feet and the teaching with the fingers. The lying tongue is the thing that obviously is false. It is deceptive. To lie is to give attention to falsehood. And again, our attention is what matters. Our attention is by which we direct the machine of the mind that is in the image of the divine Logos, or of God, of all that can be known and all that is known. It is our obligation to direct it in a manner that is towards the way of things, towards the intended order, the order of the ought. And we should not bathe ourselves in dishonesty or in the breaching of trust. If we are to be deliberate, it should be in the way of good, not in the way of deception. If we are to actively and intentionally distort something, it should be that of evil rather than that of truth. And that the retention of honesty, transparency, integrity are virtues that must be maintained and withheld. Hands that shed innocent blood. I think this one is one of the more straightforward ones. Although our project here is to be explicit about things. Because we are, as we remember, living in an age of nominalism, that is in name only, when the name loses its meaning and thereby its value. And so the things at one time seemed to be obvious to us, especially in the age of, as we discussed before, the continual bombardment of information, regardless of the content of that information, the sheer volume of it. This can distort our sense of value. As we attempt to store more and more things, things are released. They are stored at a superficial level. We need not get back into that, all of that. But hands that shed innocent blood. What does it mean to be innocent? To be innocent means to be not guilty. What does it mean to be guilty? Certainly we've been discussing many things of what it means to be guilty. The way of a man that is after the separation of things for the sake of their separation. The type of behavior of deception that is against the way that things ought to be, against the good, against the righteous. You know, an interesting thing about innocence is that it's often referred to in the sense of naivety, a lack of awareness perhaps, a lack of participation in immoral behavior. And it is this way. This is a stereotype of the innocent because often those who are not innocent are exposed to the aspects of life that lead one to understand what it means to be guilty. And I think many of us, as we go through life, learn through experiences. And we learn, whether we like it or not, now again with the double-edged sword, because there's a couple different roads that I can walk here. On one hand, the young are innocent. On the other hand, the young can be guilty by pure fascination of exploration, of their liberatory spirit without constraints, that leads them into all sorts of different predicaments by which they blow right past. And it's not until later that these accounts of what is true come back to haunt them. But generally speaking, I think if we go back far enough into our youth, we can understand and find a day of innocence before it seems to be polluted by the things of the world. And so at the same time, you have the Proverbs that are saying you should seek after understanding and wisdom. And you also have the predicament of Genesis, in which we ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, a particular type of knowledge. And just that knowledge served as enough for us to fall from the garden or from grace, or to walk with God in that circumstance, in that context. And I think it's also true that those that are geared towards piousness, as their piety increases, or as their exposure to, I think probably more appropriately it would be to say that as they progress in their understanding of complex moral dilemmas, they face the challenges between right and wrong, and the not knowing, and also I would say knowing the answer to a moral dilemma, or believing that one knows the answer to a moral dilemma, or worse, thinking that one knows the right answer to a moral dilemma and actually having it wrong. I think these sorts of things can lead us into guilt by our participation, even if it is on the road to finding what is greater, even if it is on the road to God. The testing along the way is something that is necessary for all of us. This is part of the way that we learn. We just have to hope that we don't give in. I want to say we must hope that we don't give in too much. But what exactly is too much? And so, without wanting to stray too far from our original discussion, let's return to that of innocent blood. I think a few more comments are necessary. The one that is innocent, that has not committed any insults to the divine law, for them to be stricken by the person who does not offer themselves any sort of understanding or grace in their life. They don't orient their attention towards what is greater. They don't seek to illuminate. They're comfortable in their own sluggishness, perhaps. And when things don't go their way, they perfectly are agreeable to accepting the the option of robbery and violence to get what they want, to sustain their beliefs and their way of life. And so to shed innocent blood is really a travesty. It is a self-consuming thing for man to, if we imagine him as the whole of man, to have a part of himself that is guilty and yet denies its own guilt. It denies the reality, and chooses instead to attack that part of itself that does not walk the same path as it does. It is a sad story. It's a suicidal story. And heart that deviseth wicked imaginations, feet be swift in running to mischief. Now the symbolism of the swift feet running to mischief, this is a common symbol, or the feet in general that run towards things, or that walks towards something in particular or of importance. Again, this has to do with attention. That which we run towards is something that we think is important, we think it is valuable. And we pick up our pace and the rapidity of our gait because we are excited by it. And I think our excitement is facilitated by that of the wicked imaginations of the heart. All of the feelings that we are capable of, imagine if we direct that towards mischief, subversion, illusion, deception, falsehood, immoral behavior. Imagine the type of mind that we would find ourselves having. Certainly satisfied to a degree, certain desires would be satisfied. But eventually, the eyes that were geared towards not much past what is immediate and what is satisfying and potentially blinding, these things and their significance wear thin. They wear thin quite rapidly. Now this can either lead one into a greater state of desperation by which they pursue greater and greater immoral goods. Sort of a contradiction in terms, they're lesser and lesser goods. Or it can lead them into a state of divine judgment. They can hear the call of the ought, and that plagues them, and that sends them down to the pit. I'm surprised that we don't have that language here. The pit of Sheol, this place both for the living and of the dead, it is a state of an unfortunate conscious position that is characterized by darkness. It is characterized by misunderstanding and confusion. It is characterized by dissatisfaction at all of the lofty heavenly values, or of all of the lofty heavenly spheres. And for one that lives an immoral life, to recognize the heavenly spheres would be his damnation, because he would not be able to forget that, just like he could not forget the drug that he uses to satiate himself. It would eat at him It would gnaw at his being until it took him or he surrendered to it. A false witness that speaks lies, and he that soweth discord among brethren. My son, keep your father's commandment, and forsake not the law of your mother. Bind them continually upon your neck, upon your heart, and tie them about your neck. Now this is a verse that we've seen before, and I was quick to say neck there because we have seen it before. This is something that we have described before. And for that description, I would encourage previous episodes. When you go, it shall lead you. When you sleep, it shall keep you. And when you awake, it shall talk with you. So this law, the law of your mother, the commandments of your father, the thing that you have bound upon your heart, the thing that filters your conscious experience into some actionable behavior in the external world. I say external world as it is something that can be categorized as different from the internal sphere of the mind. This law and this commandment is direction and order. Direction and order. That is the belief that there is a direction and there is an order. Not every father or every mother is sufficient keepers of these commandments or of these laws, but I think if we are thinking in symbolic terms, which again is how we used to describe this in the first place, not necessarily in terms of the fallen being, but rather the terms that are associated with the archetype of the father and of the mother. Now, of course, we can have the double-edged sword or the other side of the coin, the good and the evil of everything. But when we see this in the proverb, we're thinking of the good. So to block that path, I think, is important. That path of thought that leads us into the negative, into the breaking apart of things. And we always have to imagine what that positivity is. So again, when you go, it shall lead you. When you sleep, it shall keep you. When you awake, it shall talk with you. So it's something that will be with you always. It's interesting when it says, when you sleep, it shall keep you. And what does it mean then in this case for us to be kept by a law and a commandment in a state of unconsciousness? It's a difficult thing to imagine. Possibly it has an effect on our dreams. Dreams, important symbolic structures in and of themselves. You know, one has to wonder, we all have experiences of sleeping long hours, or sufficient hours, I should say, or two different bouts of sleep on 2 different days. One, let's say, is our normal 8 hours, another is a normal 8 hours. One, for no seeming reason, we feel exhausted the day after, and the other, we feel entirely rested. Now, surely there are many reasons for that, But I can't help but to imagine that one of the at least contributing factors is to know, and when one lays their head to bed at night, that they are free from guilt, that this does not plague them in their sleep, nor does it keep them up at night, and allows them to rest easy. For the commandments is a lamp, and the law is a light, and reproofs of instruction are the way of life. And so just as we supposed, this is order. It is the thing by which we can see. Now, the commandment is the lamp, an interesting analogy. It's the thing that facilitates the light. These days we are often worried about commands from certain places, and I think that we rightfully should be. But these commands are necessary at a certain level, where they ought to be. The commands ought to be had, ought to be given, and ought to be had. The law is the light. An interesting thing to compare the law to the light, because it's not necessarily something that binds one to the path. It just makes it so that one can see the path. The individual can do as the individual pleases. And so discretion is necessary. Understanding, wisdom, this is where this all comes in. To keep you from the evil woman, from the flattery of the tongue of a strange woman. Lust not after her beauty in your heart, neither let her take you with her eyelids. For by means of a whorish woman a man is brought to a piece of bread, and the adulteress will hunt for the precious life. So the whorish woman is one, obviously, that spends many nights with multiple different men. She perverts the experience that ought to be had between two people that truly love each other to something that is reduced to the satisfaction of pleasures and desires. And of course she uses this for her own purposes. This is the essence of the whorish woman. And a man is brought to a piece of bread, he is reduced, just as her behavior reduces. The man, therefore, is reduced to, in this case, a piece of bread, something that is not sufficient to sustain oneself. It can be the destruction of a man to involve himself in the essences, or find the spirits that wish to live their life and behave in such a way that takes important duties and practices and reduces them. This is very similar to the temptress in chapter 5. Again, we've talked about it. The woman that breaks apart the whole for the pieces. The adulteress will hunt for the precious life, because she wants to consume it. The hunter hunts for an animal so that he may kill it and consume it for his own sustenance. Now a person, in this case a woman, that would do so But instead of hunting an animal to sustain herself, she hunts relations. She hunts unified peoples in order to break them apart. And in their disunity, she sustains herself. This is not quite a good person. This is an evil person. Can a man take fire in his bosom and his clothes not be burned? The answer to that is no. Can one go upon hot coals and his feet not be burned? The answer again is no. Now, of course, if you go fast enough, we can play with the analogy, but that's not the point. It's to stand there and face it. If you are to accept that woman, truly accept her. In the context of a good and healthy relationship, this will be the destruction of that. So he that goes into his neighbor's wife, whosoever toucheth her shall not be innocent. The innocence is the unity, it's the purity of that institution. The institution of the union between man and woman. Something that has been socially agreed upon for many thousands of years. Men do not despise a thief, if he steal to satisfy his soul when he is hungry. But if he be found, he shall restore sevenfold. He shall give all the substance of his house. Now I like this verse, and I like it because it's not as though one should not have a particular feeling about somebody that steals when they're hungry, because there is a violation of what is right in that situation. But rather what this is prompting us to do is to say and to consider the situation of the other, to empathize with it. Do not despise him. If the soul is reduced, that the only thing will satisfy it is by sustaining the body so it preserves itself, then give him grace. But at the same time, this person needs to understand that this is not acceptable behavior. It is not right to do. And so as a result, the person that has stolen food, this thief, must pay 7 times what he stole. He shall give all the substance of his house. Quite a difficult penalty. But for empathy of a man, when he is stolen from, especially if it's something that is extremely valuable or that may preserve him, understandable. But whoso committeth adultery with a woman lacks understanding. He that does it destroys his own soul. A wound and dishonor shall he get, and his reproach shall not be wiped away. And so even if he accepts guilt, just like a permanent stain on a piece of clothing, this will remain, and we will have to wear it if we commit that type of crime. For jealousy is the rage of a man, therefore he will not spare in the day of vengeance. in the crime that was committed and the sin that was committed. Not just the individual is affected. He will not regard any ransom, neither will he rest content, though you givest many gifts. That insult is irreconcilable. And so that concludes chapter 6. We will continue next time with chapter 7, Proverbs chapter 7.